What's up, guys? Neil Orfield here, and I'm going to go over some playoff best ball strategy, talking a little bit of underdog playoff best ball, drafters playoff best ball, and now, as of today, DraftKings playoff best ball as well. We have many different contests that are only going to be running this week because the playoffs start next weekend. I'll go over a little bit of the differences in the platforms, go over a little bit of strategy for each site. While you're coming in, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit that notification button so you can get alerts when our shows go live. First, I'm going to go over Underdog a little bit, and we have a promo code. Use promo code Stokastic, that's Stokastic, and you can receive a deposit match bonus up to $100 for first-time depositors. All right, Underdog, the structure is pretty simple. You're drafting each week, you're going to get scoring for one quarterback, one running back, two wide receivers slash tight ends. So those are grouped together. Wide receivers and tight ends on Underdog are just grouped together as one position. You have one flex position and then five players not accumulating points on your bench. If you're not familiar with best ball, I'll just say briefly, you accumulate points for those positions. So you're drafting 10 different players, and you're only accumulating points each week for, again, one quarterback, one running back, two wide receivers slash tight ends, and one flex player. Anybody who is not among your top scoring players from those positions each week, you're not getting points for those. So you're just getting points for five players each week. Even on Underdog, though, there are a few different types of contests. I'll go over the lower dollar ones. There are some higher dollar buy-in contests as well, but the lower dollar ones are the Gauntlet 2, which was just released today, and then the Mitten 3, which is actually probably going to fill today, but I imagine they're going to come out with a new contest today that's kind of today or tomorrow that's pretty similar in structure. So the Gauntlet 2 is a $25 entry fee. For all of these contests, actually, for every site, every contest that I've seen so far, you're in a draft room of six people drafting against each other. And that's the case in the Gauntlet 2. You're drafting 10 rounds. As I said, I went over the positions there, and there are you're drafting 10 rounds, 5 scoring points each week. In the Gauntlet 2, only one of those 6 advances to round 2. Then you're regrouped to a new group in round 2. Then one of those 6 from round 2 will advance to round 3. Then you're going to be put into groups of 8 for the conference championship week. And then only one of those 8 teams will be advancing to the Super Bowl, at which point there will be a 157 team final. It's a very top heavy structure, the Underdog Gauntlet. It is 200,000 to first, 75,000 to second, and then 25,000 to third. So third place gets an eighth of what first place gets in the Gauntlet 2. The Mitten, a little bit flatter, a little bit of a different structure in general. It's a $5 entry, 2 out of 6 advance to round 2 in the Mitten. So you're a little bit likelier there. 2 out of 12 advance to round 3, and then you're grouped to a group of 20 for the conference championships, and just 2 out of 20 make it out of that conference championship week. And then it's a 314 team final for Super Bowl week in the Mitten 3. It's a little bit flatter than the Gauntlet. It's 35,000 to first, 17.5 thousand to second, and then 10,000 to third, 8,000 to fourth, 6 and 5 to fifth and sixth place. So a little bit flatter, still, relatively top heavy, but at least a slightly flatter payout structure there. Which means you might be able to take more. Not because of the flatter payout structure, but because of the advancement. Because you're able to advance 2 to round 2 instead of just 1, you maybe can take a little bit more risks there in this contest as opposed to the Gauntlet. But in general, on Underdog, you are because you're advancing week to week, so it's not cumulative scoring, and because it is so top heavy, the payout structures, generally I'm building for the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is the week that you care about the most. All you're trying to do is win the whole damn thing. You're not just trying to make it to the Super Bowl round. You're trying to win it because, as I said, it is 200,000 to first in the Gauntlet, and then if you get last place in the final round, you're not making much money at all. So in general, trying to make it, not just make it to the Super Bowl, but make a great team in the Super Bowl. As I said, there is no tight end spot on Underdog. It is just tight end / wide receiver. So you don't even need to draft a tight end at all on Underdog if you're not going to get one that you really believe in. It's also half point per reception on Underdog. That's different than either of the other sites. And it's interestingly, it's -2 points for a fumble, -1 point for an interception. Interesting that there's a distinction in the turnovers there. And then, as I said, very top heavy in terms of the payout structure. So, in terms of a little bit of strategy for Underdog, know your matchups. So, we know now it's been in the Gauntlet 1, people were drafting without really knowing what the matchups were going to be going in. In the Gauntlet 2 now, we know what the matchups are for this coming weekend. Generally, I'm not going to be drafting players against each other. I might make some exceptions, but generally, I don't want to draft too many Vikings and Giants players because only one of those teams is going to be advancing to the following round. So, if you draft players from each team, one of those players is only going to be valuable for one round. So, in general, I would avoid drafting players from teams who are playing each other in week one. There are, of course, some exceptions, but in general, something I'm avoiding. You got to know who is on bye. So Kansas City and Philadelphia not playing this week. So if you draft too many of the players from that team, you're not going to advance past round one. I mean, if you're drafting, you could theoretically draft up to 5 players from Kansas City and Philadelphia. Certainly very risky. But if you want to make a build that's like, I think the Chiefs and the Eagles are going to be in the Super Bowl, that's something you could risk and just hope that you run into some, your group in round one is relatively weak. Something you could do, but probably pretty risky because then you're really counting on if you draft 5 players from those 2 teams, you're really counting on the other 5 players from your team stepping up and getting you through round one. I would never draft more than 5 because if you draft 6 players from Kansas City and Philadelphia, then you only have 4 players remaining accumulating points for round one. You're playing against every other team in your draft is going to have 5 players accumulating points. So not something that I'm willing to risk. I generally will keep it to 3 or 4 total players from Kansas City and Philadelphia. Again, like I said, you could draft up to 5, but it's certainly risky because you're really counting on those other 5 players on your team all putting up pretty big scores in round one. It is a top heavy payout structure, as I said. So in general, on Underdog, I'm going to be building teams for the Super Bowl. You don't need to put up 200 fantasy points in round one. It doesn't really matter how many fantasy points you put up as long as you advance to the second round. You just need to squeak by, get through each round. The Super Bowl week is the week that you really need to put up a big score because again, it is so top heavy. And on Underdog, really on all of these sites, correlation is key. So I'm, as I said, generally building for the Super Bowl. I want to have scenarios where I'm going to be fielding a full team for the Super Bowl. So I'm going to want to have at least one quarterback in the Super Bowl, at least one running back from the Super Bowl, at least 2 wide receivers / tight ends, and then a flex spot as well. So I want to have 5 players scoring points for my team in the Super Bowl. I don't think you're likely to be able to win without that, unless if it is Kansas City versus the Eagles, it's possible a team with just 4 players putting up points could win something like that. But in general, you're going to need at least 5 players scoring points in the Super Bowl. So you're keeping that in mind as you're building. And typically, I think the most common structure would be a 4-3-3 build. So typically, I would take I'll choose a team and I will draft their quarterback that I'll say, I think that this team is going to make it to the Super Bowl. And I'm going to draft 4 players from that team from, say, the NFC, maybe it's the Eagles. And then if I do draft 4 players from the Eagles, then I want to have players from the AFC. So typically I'm choosing one team to be kind of my primary team, which would be, say it's the Eagles. Then if it's the Eagles, then it's probably not going to be the Chiefs on the other side because they both have buys. But then I would choose 2 teams from the AFC where I'm kind of taking 3 players from each team. And this is not an exact science at all, but just in general, thinking about the structure. Who do I think has a shot to make a Super Bowl? Do I want to have multiple outs here? So in that case, if I pick the Eagles, maybe I want to think, okay, I want to have a team where the Bengals make it to the Super Bowl, or probably not the Chiefs, maybe the Bills. The Bengals or Bills, good examples from the AFC on the other side. Maybe I draft 4 players from the Eagles, 3 from the Bengals, 3 from the Bills. I don't know. Just think along those lines. You need to be cognizant at all times of whether this team could field a full team in the Super Bowl, and whether, generally I try to have multiple scenarios where multiple teams make it. Usually I'll have one team that I kind of stake it on and plant my flag and say this team I'm betting on them making the Super Bowl, and then have a few outs from the other conference as I'm building. So that's generally my strategy when I'm building on Underdog. On Drafters, now it's fairly different from Underdog. And as I start talking about Drafters, I should tell you, you can use promo code Stokastic on Drafters to get a deposit match bonus up to $100 for first-time depositors. Okay, so Drafters, there are a few different contests. I'm looking primarily at the $20 entry contest. It's again going to be a draft room of 6 to start. There are 12 rounds on Drafters. That's a little bit different than Underdog. On Underdog, we're only drafting for 10 rounds. On Drafters, you're doing 12 rounds. And on Drafters, it's also a little bit different in terms of the structure of your team. You're drafting 1 quarterback, 1 running back, 2 wide receivers, and on Drafters, wide receivers and tight ends are not grouped together. So you're scoring each week 1 quarterback, 1 running back, 2 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 1 flex, and then you have 6 bench spots on Drafters because you are drafting 12 rounds. So pretty different there from Underdog. But the biggest difference on Drafters versus Underdog is it's cumulative points. So you're not advancing your team each week. Every team is live throughout the playoffs. You're not getting knocked out each week. Your team will remain there. It's cumulative points. Of course, it is still aggregated by week. So, if you're drafting a player who is playing in round 1 and going to play all 4 weeks, if they're not putting up major points each week, it's still not really helping you. You still need to have some spike weeks from your players, because again, it's aggregated week to week. It's not like you get say if you draft Tyler Boyd and the Bengals make the Super Bowl and he puts up 10 fantasy points per week, you don't really get 40 points from Tyler Boyd. You get whatever, he might not make it into your lineup for any of those 4 weeks. Just giving you an example there. If he puts up 10 points per week, it's not like it's cumulative points per player. It's still aggregated week to week. So you do need to put up a good number of fantasy points each week. As I mentioned, there is a tight end spot on Underdog as opposed to on Drafters as opposed to Underdog, which really makes the tight ends more of a premium on Drafters. Guys like Travis Kelce is going to be more of a premium, but then throughout, players that you might not even bother drafting on Underdog suddenly become valuable in the tight end spot on Drafters. So definitely more of a premium there. It's also full PPR as opposed to Underdog. And on Drafters, it's -2 points for any type of turnover, no distinction there. It's also a flatter payout structure than on Underdog. And then it's also, I think that there's a chance that we're going to see overlay on Drafters. I'm not sure that it's going to happen, but we did see overlay in the regular season. I think that there's a pretty good chance that we see overlay again here in the playoffs. It's not very full at this point. So I would jump into Drafters drafts today and get those going now, because we only have, 4 more days until the playoffs start. And I think there's a really good chance that it does overlay. Okay, so drafters strategy. I still think it's best to be able to roster a full Super Bowl roster, even though it is cumulative, so maybe not quite as important. You're still, you still want to have a full team each week if you can. That's the best way to accumulate a lot of fantasy points. So generally, still trying to roster a full team during the Super Bowl week. Also during the first round. So still the Chiefs, the Eagles not scoring any points for you in round 1. I'm trying to roster a full team throughout the entire playoffs, and hopefully a good team throughout the playoffs. I will say though, despite the fact that I'm still trying to make a full Super Bowl roster, I think players who are less likely to make the Super Bowl become a little bit more valuable on Drafters than on Underdog, because the number of points you score early on matters more than it does on Underdog. Again, on Underdog, just kind of trying to squeak through the early rounds, but it really matters how many points you actually put up. Here you are hoping to put up 200 plus fantasy points in round 1. So players like Justin Jefferson, who, obviously I hope he makes the Super Bowl, but I think there's a good chance my Vikings do not make it to the Super Bowl. A little bit more valuable here because Justin Jefferson could put up 30 fantasy points in round one, and that's pretty valuable. Same thing for the other side of it. Saquon Barkley can put up 30 fantasy points against this Vikings defense pretty easily. So some of these players who I don't really think the team is making the Super Bowl definitely become more valuable on drafters as opposed to Underdog. You're just kind of, I'm using them in places just to try to get me past round one, but on drafters, the actual number of fantasy points they can put up matters more. So I do value those players a little bit higher on drafters who I don't think have a real shot at making the Super Bowl. And as I said, tight ends being required on drafters become a little bit more valuable. So those are kind of the differences between drafters and Underdog. And then finally today, we actually had DraftKings come out and announce some playoff best ball, which kind of took me by surprise. I've just looked it over a little bit here, but I think I might jump into some of these drafts. Again, I think DraftKings, we also might see a little bit of overlay, and it is a wild contest. I'm not sure they put quite as much thought into the product as drafters and Underdog did. We have a deposit match bonus again for DraftKings. If you are a first time depositor for DraftKings, we have a deposit match bonus up to $500. We don't have a promo code. Just click the link in the description below this video if you want to take advantage of the DraftKings deposit match bonus up to $500. DraftKings, the scoring is like it is for DFS on DraftKings. So if you know the DFS scoring, same thing there. It's full PPR, bonuses for 100 rushing or receiving yards, or 300 passing yards, and then negative 1 point per turnover. Here's the wildest thing about DraftKings. 20 round drafts here for DraftKings. We are going to be drafting just from really the bottom of the barrel on DraftKings for a playoff best ball. That's not many players or teams you're choosing from. I think you're probably going to be drafting players who aren't even likely to see the field in a 20 round draft. I don't know. I haven't actually done it yet, but you're drafting a lot of players on DraftKings. You have a little bit of a bigger team, again, because we're drafting 20 rounds. 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, and a flex, plus 12 bench spots. So 8 active players per week on DraftKings, and then 12 bench spots. It's a flatter payout structure than Underdog. On DraftKings, it is the main contest that I'm looking. There are again a few different contests, but the first one I'm looking at, $20 entry fee. It is 1 of 6 advance from round 1 to round 2. Then you're regrouped. 1 of 6 advance from round 2 to round 3. Regrouped again to another group of 6, and then 1 of 6 advance to the Super Bowl week, and then it's an 81 team final on DraftKings in that $20 buy-in contest. Yeah, it's 100,000 a first on DraftKings. It is all the way down to 31,000 a second, so not extremely flat, but then 20,000 a third, so relatively flat relative to Underdog. Still, fairly top heavy. Still on DraftKings, I'm drafting for the Super Bowl in general. I want to correlate my team. I want to have the possibility of making a full roster on the Super Bowl. It is still fairly top heavy. So I think my strategy on DraftKings, and again, still new to it, haven't actually done a draft yet. I think that I'm drafting those Super Bowl players early. So players from teams that I think are going to make the Super Bowl, drafting early. And then I think if I'm able, I'll then go back and draft studs from some of the teams that I don't think are as likely to make the Super Bowl. Maybe from the Jacksonville Chargers game. A lot of players from that team, from that game, are going to look pretty good for week 1, maybe advance you to round 2 and so on, and then hopefully then your teams that you're expecting to make the Super Bowl can carry you from there. But I think you can kind of start just drafting those Super Bowl bound teams, the teams that you think have a good chance to make the Super Bowl, and then kind of go back and try to find some studs from the games that are less likely to make the Super Bowl. I think those ones being the best example, the Jacksonville Chargers game, the Vikings Giants game. I think you can find some players, and then even like Seattle, if you want to take like Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, some of these guys who might not go very early, you can pick those up later to help you get through the first, maybe second round. As I said, correlation still very important on DraftKings, trying to make teams that can field full rosters on the Super Bowl. And my final note on DraftKings is be ready for chaos. From what I've heard and what I've seen in regular season best ball on DraftKings, there's a lot of casual players on DraftKings. They don't really care about any kind of correlation. They're not stacking. They're not worried about Super Bowl odds. They're picking their favorite players, names they know. So just expect to have a little bit of chaos. Your stack might be broken up. Do the best you can to build some correlation into your lineups, but it's going to be a little bit tougher when other people are not really putting in any kind of strategy there. So that would be my advice. My best advice on DraftKings is just be ready for some chaos. Those are the key differences, some strategy points here. I don't know if I'm going to be doing any other best ball content for these playoffs. If you would like me to, hit me up, maybe comment in the video that you'd like to see. Maybe we could do a draft at some point, maybe go through a draft might be kind of fun. Maybe mention in the comments if you would like to see that, because I think I'd have some fun doing a little bit more best ball content. I am super into best ball, so having some fun looking through these different structures, and I will be drafting throughout the week, so maybe I'll do a stream at some point, who knows. Anyway, good luck to you in your playoff best ball contest. Let's take one of these down.